Well, welcome to the Sit and Sip podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to breed vulnerability and authenticity in our everyday relationships. And I have a special guest with me, Natalie. I am so glad you're on this show. So, Natalie, girl, we got some tea to spill, right?
Absolutely.
And we are sipping on. I have like just some sparkling water, and then I know Natalie, she looks all fancy and stuff with her drink. Look at her, looking all cute.
So cute.
So Natalie, so we're gonna talk about a topic today that I think will encourage the listeners, but also you seem to have personal experience with. So we're gonna talk about Natalie's how-to guide to guard yourself from situationships. So before we get all into that, into that tea, Natalie, I want you to describe yourself in 3 words.
Okay. 3 words. I would say. Authentic, caring, and adventurous.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you fit all those words in the best way possible. So,
Thank you.
and Natalie, we're gonna talk about this topic. We've talked about this topic off camera because I've known you for a while.
Yeah.
2-3 years maybe.
Maybe. Yeah.
It feels like it.
Yeah,
Feels like a whole decade, you know. But now I just thought you were a really great person to bring on to talk about this topic. And like I stated, you seem to have personal experience. So before we you talk about your personal story, your journey through that, what is a situationship for the listeners who don't know what that is?
Yeah, of course. So, a situationship can be described as having all the benefits and things of a relationship without the actual title or commitment. So doing everything that would entail, in a serious relationship and just not having, again, that commitment. So.
And would you say that you've been in a series of situationships knowingly or unknowingly?
I think that I was in a situationship in the beginning, like unknowingly, and then I knew. and then I just stayed in it. So.
And so, do you think, like, in a situationship, like, did it gradually progress where you're like, okay, did you ever think that the longer I'm in it, maybe this will turn into a relationship, maybe this person will commit to me like I feel like I should? Like, what was running through your mind when you were going through those moments or when you were in those situationships?
Yeah, definitely. I think from the very beginning, I was definitely thinking that it could develop into something more. And even as I stayed and went back and all those things, was still with the hope of this can turn into something more.
Yeah.
This can become an actual relationship, even years after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And girl, you are not the only one because I know I've been in a series of situationships knowingly. So, and like I love how you said like you didn't know unknowingly and then you knew, and like I feel like I knew and then I knew more, and I'm like I still stay.
Exactly.
And so, but we talked about guarding your heart. So talk about that. That might be a term that not everyone is familiar with. Like guard your heart. Like what? Like guard it with the R's? Like kinda? Like what are we talking about here? So could you like define that for us, for the audience?
Yeah, of course. If you don't mind, I'm just gonna have my Bible here. I'm just
yes, girl, open that good word.
I'm gonna take it straight from the scripture. So
yes.
It's actually in I believe it's in Proverbs. I just read it earlier today to one of my girlfriends. I actually have a tab specifically for that verse.
Yeah.
For a reason. But so it's Proverbs 4:23. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the spring of life. So keep your heart, in other words, guard your heart. So with that can be defined as is like, hey, what comes from your heart, right? Like feelings, mainly, and truly, right? The springs of life, right? It's like guarding your heart is guarding your time guarding your actions, guarding your thoughts even. And I know it's crazy because it's like, man, like I think our heart can sometimes want to influence our thoughts when really our thoughts should like inform our heart, right? So I think JP Jonathan Pukluda, right, from Watermark says that like, hey, don't follow your heart, inform your heart. So like guarding your heart again just means, hey, how am I gonna spend my time? How am I gonna, what am I gonna invest my attention on, my thoughts, all those things. That's it. I think that's how it's best described. Guard your heart. Just guarding those emotions. And hey, we feel, and sometimes we really can't help. We can't suppress feelings, right? But we can guard against what we feed our heart. So again, through time, through thoughts, through what you see, hear, who you're with.
And do you feel like when you were in those situationships, it was the opposite for you, where your heart was informing your actions? Like, oh, well, if I, do this to him, if I prepare this for him, if I reveal this part of myself to him, it maybe will lead to something. You feel like it was, what thought, per se, was really running through your mind?
Yeah, definitely. I think at the beginning of like certain like situationships, like I really was just following my feelings and sharing more information than I should have shared, even like about myself, being vulnerable when there was no commitment there. And so, yeah, to answer your question,
Yeah.
it's definitely.
And it's so hard to do that because you just never want to just be led on for years and years and years and just hoping. But I've been so guilty of that because I was hoping that, for me personally, I was hoping that maybe one day they'll see that I'm worth it. Maybe one day. And that what kept me going. But that's what kept me going, which looking back on was not healthy because I never really knew that I was worth of commitment from the jump. And some of these guys I'll be in a situationship with, that situationship would end, and often abruptly, and then they would date someone else, and then they would get married immediately. I'm like, what? That could have been me.
Yeah.
Which I'm glad I didn't end up in a relationship with that person or married, but I was like, what about this girl was different? And I always thought, oh, it's because she looks better because of this or because of this. No, because she raised that expectation. She raised that standard. And I didn't have that standard or that security in myself to be like, no, you are going to make a commitment to me to be, we're going to be girlfriend, boyfriend, or we're going to get married. You will not have that part. And be secure in myself that if that person says no, then I can walk away. But I wish that I could have grown that secure in myself. And even now, to this point, there are some moments where I'm like, I'm willing to compromise in that area because I've been waiting for so long. I'm like, well, maybe this is as good as it gets. Even though I've seen great marriages and great relationships that are based on God's word, but due to my insecurity, due to my low self-esteem in moments, I just think that a situationship is what's best for me.
Wow.
And that hurts me, but the same, it scares me, it hurts me. Like, you know the truth, but you don't want to operate in it because your insecurity is speaking, not your heart, not the Spirit of God speaking to you. And I didn't know if you ever walked through those moments too, where you're like, well, this is as good as it's gonna get. I don't deserve better. I don't know if that's what you ever faced, or if it was more of hoping, putting your hope or just following your feelings was more your forte.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a lot of, definitely the feeling of this is great.
Yeah.
Like the feeling of like, oh my gosh, like I love, or at least thought, like the feelings of love, like were there, and like vice versa. Oh, but this person also loves me, like, and we share all of this together, and we're inseparable, and all these things, right? So just the thought of like, nothing's technically quote unquote wrong here, right? Like the feeling of like everything's going great, but in reality, things not being fine. So like, if anything, I had like goggles on, like
Rose-colored glasses, maybe.
yeah. So, and I didn't realize until people were actually speaking in on that, like, sometimes family or friends that I would tell about, and they would just look very confused. And I was like, well, why do you look confused?
Right. Everything is fine. Everything is perfect. And
literally.
Yeah, you're like, this is great, So what would you, looking back on those situationships, like knowing now what you knew, if you knew now what you knew then, or knew then what you knew now, sorry, I said that backwards.
Yeah.
What would you have told yourself?
I would have told myself, that's a good question. Wow. I would have said, you are worth the commitment. And so is that person. Like a lot of times I think we, like in speaking of guarding your heart, like, hey, guard the heart of the other person too, right? Like if you're hanging out with the opposite, sex, like don't ask all these deep questions and like, because that's how you slip into a situationship right there. You start, filling each other's emotional needs.
Wow, that's
and like eventually, like if you're not like following Christ and like, if you're not a believer, in Jesus Christ, like it's easy once you're fulfilling each other's emotional needs to fall into physical needs, being filled. And then it's like, okay, we have emotional need, check. Physical need, check. Friendship, check. Why do we need a relationship? What's up with labels these days?
Yeah. We're in
So-
2021,
Right.
I love that insight, because the one thing I wanted to even kind of add another caveat. Sometimes I love how you have family members that were speaking into your life and saying, "Hey, girl, what's going on?" But did you ever feel like maybe in church culture that situationships could be overlooked for the sake of, oh, we're just doing a group date, a group outing, or we're just doing a group that? Do you ever think that maybe sometimes, of course it's not the church's fault, but sometimes it could go under the cover if you don't have people in your life that are asking you those targeted questions?
I think that, depends on the church for sure, because I think like the church that I go to like does a really good job at like, hey, like if you're it's just you, a girl and a guy hanging out by yourself, like, what is that? Is that truly just a friendship, or like is there more going on there?
Yeah.
Are y'all meeting each other's needs?
Ooh,
Like,
that's good.
more than a regular friend would.
Right.
Like, are you talking to the opposite sex more than you would a girlfriend?
Or who are you calling first? Are you calling, your guy friend first, or are you calling your girlfriends first?
Yeah.
But one thing I can attest for sure, like of having you in my life and having great other women who love Jesus in my life, like I'm able to run to you all to feel, of course, ultimately there's Jesus, but feel that emotional need.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'm tempted to go the other way and go like, come right back here,
Yeah.
No, you need to, of course, share, tell God what you're really going through, and then tell us. But now that I have such great girlfriends, and before when I was in those situations, I really didn't, and so I really needed, I felt like a man was going to fill my emotional need. But another thing is that I have such great girlfriends, like the guy that I started dating, like he's going to be a way more awesome friend. Y'all set the standard so high.
Yeah.
So, great friends who can talk to me, who can pray for me, who can say, girl, that ain't it. That outfit don't match. Like all of that. Like, granted, I'm not looking for a guy to be my girlfriend, but meaning that just the depth and the intentionality that we have, like I should expect nothing less from a man who is willing to make a commitment to me. And that's what I have to be reminded back to. And then also that verse you stated, like guard your heart above all else, with all that you do flows from it. And I'm like, okay, I'm spending my time getting my emotional need met from this guy. Like I love how you said your physical boundaries can could come loose, or
Yeah.
you could be tempted in that area, and it's not something that anyone wants, you know.
Yeah. Especially they're attractive.
Yeah, oh, for sure.
It's
Oh,
like-
they got that Bible over, and they got it highlighted, like,
Yeah.
like you're like, whoa, I see that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so Natalie, in wrapping this up, so what would you tell a girl or a guy who's currently in a situationship? What would you tell them right now on how to guard their heart?
I would just ask them what they're feeding within that situationship. Like, hey, I would ask, hey, what are you feeding? Are you guarding your heart? Are you guarding the other person's heart? And what is the end goal? What is the end goal, and are you moving towards it? Yeah.
So we could just drop the mic right here. Just drop it.
That's nice.
Natalie has it like that. Well, Natalie, I have been encouraged. I thank you so much for sharing your story on how to guard your heart against situationships. And like I said, I wish I would have had this advice years ago. I wish I didn't have to go through the pain of being in a situationship, but came out wiser, came out so much stronger. But Natalie, you have been a joy. I wish you all the best. And we're going to still have a podcast after this.
Yes.
Really. Our whole life, all our conversations are podcasts. We just don't record all of them.
Exactly.
We just drop bars and no one knows because we just have great conversations. But, well, everyone, thank you for listening to the Sit and Sip podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to breed authenticity through our everyday relationships, to talks on faith, church culture, and everything in between. You can check me out on @EyesForOne on Instagram and listen on Spotify or wherever you stream podcasts. So now we hope to have you again on the show. So everyone, thank you for listening. Bye.